Closing out our day on the atrium stage is automotive security trends and their support of future mobility.
Good.
Hi, so good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Tisdale. I am with a cyber research firm called GRIM, and we are going to discuss today the future of mobility and the automotive security trends that will be supporting the industry. This afternoon, we have a great panel that is reflective of the full cyber automotive ecosystem, and we have to my left, immediate left, Andre. Just Andre's good. From Lear, and next to him, Kevin Baltus with GM, and at the very end, Dennis Cosgrove with Booz Allen Hamilton, a consultant. But I'm going to let each of them do their own introductions so that you can get a sense for what roles they play within their individual organizations. Can you start, Andre?
Sure. So I'm Andre. I'm the Vice President for Cybersecurity and Functional Safety at Lear Corporation. Lear's America's largest Tier 1 suppliers. So basically every day I deal with making our products secure that we deliver to the car makers.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Baltus. I'm a director in product cybersecurity at General Motors. Product cybersecurity is an arm of a larger organization, global cybersecurity, which includes manufacturing security and IT security. My role is to lead the team responsible for securing the connected vehicle ecosystem. So by connected vehicle, that's the modules that are connected in the vehicle itself, like infotainment, radio, clusters, and displays, the telecom channel working with the carriers, and then the IT back office. At General Motors, we take cybersecurity very seriously. We have a large global dedicated organization addressing it, and this is a organizational mindset driven top down. So glad to be here today.
Hi, and I'm Dennis Cosgrove. I am from Booz Allen Hamilton, where I'm a principal. I run our transportation and manufacturing business. We work with automakers and Tier 1 suppliers at security operations all the way up into organization and strategy. So for the last 5 years or so, I've worked on automotive cybersecurity and have also been a partner to the ISAC as that was stood up several years ago. So happy to be here. Thanks.
And I'm really happy to have these gentlemen here because they truly are the thought leaders in this space. I do want to make one note for those of you in the audience. We do want to keep this very conversational. So if you have questions you'd like to ask real time, please do so. We have somebody running a mic, and we are entertaining those questions directly. But what we wanted to open the conversation with is a glimpse back at to where the industry was 4 to 5 years ago. And I think each of them have a very unique perspective for how the industry has progressed to present day. And so I'm wondering if one of you would like to take the lead in addressing the question. And I'm looking at you, Dennis, because you have the background to touch all of the suppliers and OEs. Where do you think we've had the most improvement over the last 4 to 5 years?
Sure, yeah, so going back 5 years or so, the conversations that we had with OEMs and suppliers for the most part, not in all cases, but it was asking fundamental questions about whether cybersecurity related to the vehicle was really something that needed to be worried about. So kind of like foundational challenges to the assumption that automakers should be worried about cars being hacked or that security was an issue for something like a vehicle, right? So if you go back in time, this is before the ISAC, it's before a lot of the headline-grabbing research, and there was some real questions in the industry about whether or not this was something to care about. I think what's exciting is that since then, there's been a lot of progress made inside individual automakers, in the relationship between the Tier 1 suppliers and the automakers, and then within the industry writ large. So the standing up of the ISAC, SAE has been forward-leaning. There's been a lot of work with regulators and engagement across the board to demonstrate that the industry takes this seriously. So Going all the way back 5 years, a lot of question marks and people staring at us across the table. And fast forwarding today, and a lot of progress has been made across the industry.
Do each of you have the same view of the world? Being both a supplier and an OEM, you might have a different perspective, but
I agree with Dennis. I mean, 5 years ago, we were in the beginning stages that had started years even before then of developing requirements and a strategy and building our organization so that we could really drive the security measures that we were looking for into the ecosystem, both with our tier ones, carriers, and some controls in the back office. And so it was about understanding the threats and incrementally improving our posture, because there was, as they say in the security business, no real silver bullet to solve the problems. And so it was about making sure we were taking measured steps to secure our product, working with industry such as the Auto ISAC, working with universities, working with government, working with researchers, working with tier ones. And so I think it was a collective effort to mature the collective knowledge and skill set and applying security best practices to a new industry, if you will. So we've come a long way for sure over the last 5 years, I think.
So yeah, maybe I can add a bit. So like 3 years ago, often requirements were, say, sparse and short. And today, of course, there were car makers that were very mature also 3 years ago. But today, we really see from all car makers very mature, detailed requirements around security. So I think the difference in maturity is much smaller today. Car makers are, all car makers are very mature. What I still miss, though, is a kind of a standard, like we receive very different requirements from car makers, and then how are we supposed as a supplier to deal with that? We are also a giant corporation. We cannot do one particular thing for car maker A and something different for car maker B. And both of these things are secure, but they are using a different strategy to get there.
So I think you bring up a really interesting point, and this is a non-rehearsed question, so I apologize if it throws you off slightly, but I like to keep it real. So there isn't a standard in the industry, and we're not seeing any government regulations to date with any real specifics wrapped around it. So kudos to the industry for spearheading the charge and being forward-thinking in how to provide product cybersecurity in automobiles. But do we need to have that standardization in those requirements, or is it continuously, in your opinion? And Dennis, you're from the DC area, so maybe your ear is a bit closer to the ground, though you're not a government relations person. Are you hearing any directives out there? What are we going to see in DC in terms of regulation?
Yeah, so I don't want to predict potential regulatory moves, especially in this environment. I think that's challenging. I would say that I think the industry deserves credit for taking action outside of a big event, whether a big real-world event or a big legislative event. And so the fact that there's an ISAC, for example, that exists before there was actually an incident of major consequence in the industry is an exception to the rule. And so while there is not yet sort of full harmony in requirements, and in some cases maybe not the sort of most robust information sharing, the fact that these incremental improvements have happened at the industry level and then within specific entities outside of a big forcing function is actually, I think, something that the automakers and the suppliers should be proud of. And so I think and hopefully not in a way, like if there's not a big regulatory move or there's not a big real world incident, then you're going to continue to see it be kind of stitched together, and in a way that progress is matching the need for now, I think.
That's fair.
Can I add? So there's actually work currently done on a standard, an SAE standard. SAE ISO standard is called ISO 21434. It's for cybersecurity engineering.
Rolls off the tongue, Andre.
Yeah.
I know. Eventually it will. And so those of you who are familiar with ISO 26262 for functional safety, it's pretty much the equivalent for cybersecurity. So the ideas, and I really appreciate that effort and hope that it will be successful, that car makers don't need to give us 100 pages of security requirements anymore, but can just say, be compliant to that ISO standard.
Yeah, and at General Motors, the security, safety, and privacy of our customers is paramount. So, long ago when we began this effort, we weren't waiting for regulation or standards to start. So we kind of forged our own path, and then over time, as the ISAC was stood up, which we were a key, initial member of, and standards are being developed, we participate in all those activities to be sure that we remain aligned. Same thing with potential regulatory efforts. We have a lot of conversations with many three-letter agencies who maybe aren't as knowledgeable in the automotive space relative to cybersecurity, to be sure that in time, if regulations are brought forward, those are regulations that can be met, that they're practical, they're effective, and things of that nature. And I think if you compare it to something like 26262 with the ISO standard, I think the industry kind of matured functional safety over time and then developed the spec. I think you'll see the same thing with cybersecurity. If we had the spec 6 years ago, it might have been something wildly ineffective and something we couldn't have done. But now we're learning as a collective, and I think the standard will actually be something that we can all agree on and can be something we can actually operationalize.
And I think there's a need also to find the right balance between those sort of prescriptive requirements and setting sort of best practices that the industry can drive towards collectively. The Auto ISAC has worked together. The members have to put together best practice guides, and some of them are about training and incident response. Others are focused on risk management and security by design. They're pretty significant in terms of the industry knowledge that's going into it, the effort that's being put into it. And for members to be able to share that across their organizations is a step in the direction towards getting some more unity of effort.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absent standards, there has been a lot of guidance that has been created that's kind of helped steer like kind of the overarching strategy from the FTC, from NIST, from the DHS, that weren't automotive focused, but really we're broadly, like I said, general principles that should be followed that helped, confirm that we were, taking the right approach.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting point because we start to talk about the Internet of Things and having the automobile be sort of the heartbeat of that conversation. Now, if you had the opportunity to walk through the Automobility Hall, you'll see technologies for smart cities and applications and connected devices that integrate into the vehicle. So how do we approach security when we now have to consider not just protecting the product you're developing, your end product, but all of the things that are going to interact with that product moving forward? Is there a best practice for that?
Yeah, I would say, at General Motors, we take a multi-layered defense in depth approach, which means really we put controls throughout our ecosystem, and it's kind of based on 3 pillars, the defense in depth, monitoring, detection, and incident response. And so we, by design, have products such as apps in our smartphone that connect with our vehicles. But we also realize that's part of the IoT, and there's more and more things, being connected to the IoT. I had the good fortune of going to CES last week, and the things that are being connected to the internet are just crazy. Yeah. But in any case, if you're connected, you can, eventually maybe, a smart person can find their way to try to get to a vehicle. And so what we try to do is put those boundaries around our vehicle so that if there is, an untrusted device, which is basically, all these things connected to the internet, that we feel like we have a proper, boundary and security, across our vehicle and connection so that it, is really challenging to be penetrated.
Yeah, so to add to that, when we design components, we really are overly careful around security, and whatever other component or server or whatever we connect to, we always assume the worst case. We assume that other component, the server, will be hacked. And so how do we then need to design our interfaces and our platform to be resilient against that? So basically, we assume that the specification is not fully met outside of our component, but that it can be hacked.
So on that note, when we start talking about other devices that are communicating with the vehicle, to me that would say that we also have to be collaborative as an industry, not just with each other, but with other industries outside ourselves. So you made an interesting point. I heard you speak to this at another event about consumer electronics and how automotive has a lot of engagement to do within the consumer electronics community. That coupled with things like telecommunications, they have standards within that vector that might have some implications for automotive security, especially when we talk about smart cities and connected infrastructure. Is there any lessons learned there, or are there any activities that join all of those partners together?
Yeah, I would say, speaking for General Motors, we've spoken with security experts across a lot of other industries, defense, aerospace, and medical being three principal ones, believe it or not. And so, they're dealing with a lot of the same problems that we are. So we do have a lot of good conversations about best practices and ways to do incident response and monitoring and detection. Not necessarily formal collaborations across those industries. Certainly at the ISEC, they kind of feed up to like an umbrella ISEC maybe where information is shared. So yeah, I would say, for General Motors for sure, we have done a lot of collaboration and continue with medical, aerospace, and DoD, or defense, I should say defense contractors.
Understood.
So maybe to add a challenge that we face, so we sell telematics units for cars, and we use components from the consumer electronics space in our telematics units that then find their way into a car. So you have call it an embedded modem, the cellular connection in the car, right? And so these companies are used to maintain or to update software in their modems for, 3 years. So they often run Android operating systems, say it's 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years, certainly not 10 years or 15 years. So, and then here we are, traditional automotive industry, asking that partner, which is, by the way, much, much larger than we are, to update their software for the next 15 years, right, for one individual use case. So there are certain challenges that we need to overcome.
Yeah, I do think it's an important question you're asking, because I think one of the evolutions that we can anticipate that hasn't happened yet is that the risk scenarios get outside of a kind of researcher-driven product vehicle-targeted situation and start to be about the vehicle as part of something larger, right? Whether it's the vehicle as part of a larger brand and connected to different environments across that company, and that company is the target, or if it's targeting a city or a particular industry or whatever. And so when we start, the bad news is there's no one outside of government who's sort of responsible for that larger view of things. But I do think that over time, when the security issues become more real, the vehicle will be part of a larger scenario, and not the endpoint necessarily of an attack. And so I think it's an important consideration about how it fits into that larger technological picture, and then what the security implications are for that.
So I've heard a couple of you make a mention, and this might be a hard left in the conversation, but talk about bad actors and hacker motivations. And so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's near and dear to my company's heart. As the hackers that view ourselves as an important piece to the supply chain now within the conversation of connected mobility, how are you defining first hacker motivation, likelihood, unlikelihood, and value add for having red teaming or pen testing or hacking activity occur on your products and on your platforms through the life cycle of the vehicle? A value, no value, internal, external? It's a big question.
Well, at General Motors, we have a lot of vehicles and a lot of electronic control units, and we have a very disciplined approach for how we measure, let's say, the risk posture of a module based on its complexity and connectivity, and that drives the requirements that they get sourced with. That drives the test casing and the validation plans, and certainly there's a number of security validation steps that happen as part of our security development lifecycle, from scanning to design reviews, implementation reviews, pen testing, as you described. We have both internal experts as well as external parties that we can go to for penetration testing. So yeah, I mean it's that we do all of that.
Yeah, so we work a lot on I like to call it security validation testing. You know, it's really important for us to test security in a structured way. The issue with pen testing is that if you're successful, you know it's not secure. If you're not successful, you don't know anything, right? So we really focus a lot on validation testing, where we check, in some sense, the low-hanging fruits, you know, the things that have to be secure. And that raise the hurdle for an adversary hugely, exponentially. Additionally, we do pen testing, but you know, we always recommend to the car maker to use an external pen tester on top. You know,
We
they are
recommend
specialized.
that also, just FYI.
They're specialized companies like yours, and you know, they do that for a living.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we have a mix of both. I think we've had varied degrees of success with different companies who do pen testing. So there's a reason why we arrived to where we are. So it's, yeah, I agree. Pen testing is good. But I think another kind of challenge is that as engineers, where you learn how to develop product based on functional requirements. So a lot of times with security, you're looking for kind of like the negative test cases, or how can I use this product in a way it wasn't designed to function to achieve my goals, and that's a lot harder to codify and to put into test cases and things of that nature. And so, you know, Andre's right. It becomes a very challenging part when you're doing the security reviews and testing.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges for the auto industry, actually, around security, is to break out of the engineering mindset. So security engineering is an important kind of fundamental piece to having a secure product and protecting customers, but there's a security mindset that's different, that says, sort of is on the wall and watching and understands that you can't fix away a security problem because you have adversaries that are reacting to it. And so, you know, pen testers are one example of bringing in, you know, an adversary to play that role, and to kind of get engineers used to the idea of, okay, you know, I would have never thought to do that with this. You're not supposed to do that. Having folks that have that perspective is really valuable, and it needs to be part of any strong security organization.
Perfectly stated.
Yeah.
We did talk a little bit, and Dennis, I believe you referenced it, and your connection with Booz Allen is going to be pertinent in answering this question. We referenced the ISAC. So would you mind explaining to those in the audience who maybe are not familiar with the acronym, what the ISAC is for the auto industry, and why each of us are members or partners to such a group?
Sure. And I don't speak for the ISAC. For the record, I'm very familiar with it. So an ISAC is an information sharing and analysis center. It's essentially an industry group that is protected from antitrust laws for the narrow purposes of sharing security information. And it was actually set up after the Oklahoma City bombings to be about physical security. It still has that mandate or the opportunity to have those conversations, but they've evolved more recently to be focused on cybersecurity. And so the automotive industry, I'm losing track of time, but probably about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, came together to charter an auto ISAC. It started with the automaker members first. It has expanded to the tier ones, and then more widely to telecoms and other suppliers. There's something in the order of 40 members at the moment. And so it is a protected group. It's an independent organization with staff and an executive director, Faye Francie. And that organization is dedicated to making sure that information is being shared around potential security vulnerabilities or just trends in the industry. And so that's what the Auto ISAC is. Again, it's in this case dedicated to the vehicle, and so it's different than maybe the financial services ISAC or some other ISACs that are facing, you know, minute-by-minute threats and sharing information in that way. I think the ISAC will probably evolve into something that looks like that eventually when we get to the future of mobility, but for now, there's a lot of knowledge sharing and relationship building and best practice sharing that's occurring through the ISAC.
So from GRIM's perspective, we are a partner, strategic partner to the Auto ISAC, and we view ourselves in servitude to the tiers and to the OEMs and to the others in the industry. So when we start looking at responsible disclosure in the event that we do have a find, it's really unique for us, for our type of business, and I have to imagine it's very unique for each of your concerns as well. So do you have, maybe not examples, but are there theories that you could discuss for what is a good share and what isn't, and what you might collaborate with the ISAC, or what you might just work on internally, if that's a comfortable question?
Yeah, I think there's been a few submissions, and I'll give some like just general examples. I don't know if they necessarily went through the ISAC, but when you think about the big recent security events like Meltdown, Inspector, and Blueborn, when those kinds of things happen, our security teams at General Motors determines what the impact is, not only to our IT back office, but also our connected vehicle ecosystem. And let's say, for example, there was one particular module that we found had Blueborn, some susceptible Bluetooth stack, let's say. I'm being very specific. And so it could be the case then that we would take that information and go to the ISAC and say, hey, since we all, most automakers use pretty much the same tier ones, right?
Right.
So chances are, if it's in our module, it could be in others' modules. So being, a good corporate citizen, we would go to the ISAC and say, hey, we had this particular, stack in this tier ones. Actually, we'd probably go to tier one first, and then we'd figure out who to report it. But the point is that you now have that organization that is together, as Dennis described, to share this kind of information, which is not competitive, and it's about, sharing best practices and knowledge and information about security events. And
For
so
the
that's,
greater good of
that's
the
right.
industry.
And so that's a very specific example where, where you take, like I said, something you read in the news or hear about, and you would not even think about your car. But we have people who find that stuff, and that comes to us, and then we investigate.
Yeah, so maybe to look at the user side, I guess. So we are a member of the Auto ISAC. We very carefully monitor the reports coming from the Auto ISAC. And for every single report, we have a system in place to check, okay, does that affect us? Does it affect any of our components? What does it mean? Do we need to disclose to the car maker? So I think the Auto ISAC is really an invaluable input source for vulnerabilities. And it's sort of, we talked about standards earlier, it sort of provides a standardized way of receiving input eventually. At least that's my hope.
So do you see a blending in your position title with Lear couples together cybersecurity and safety? Are we starting to see the lines blur between those two elements internally?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think many organizations go that path, and it makes perfect sense. It's not the same thing. So people often confuse that a bit, that it's, the process looks fairly similar, looks basically the same, right? So let's just use the same people, do the same stuff. That's not at all. But having said that, there are many components when you understand functional safety issues where you can ask the question, okay, to get that impact to my component that has a safety critical impact, can an attacker, an adversary, do that as well, right? And so I think there are lots of synergies between the two areas. The mindset is fairly similar. So at least, we had the discussion a year ago, and it made perfect sense to merge these two areas.
Yeah, I think, to Andre's point, if you have a system that's designed with functional safety in mind, and if the adversary's target is a safety system, it could be the case that because it was designed with functional safety in mind, that will thwart the attack, even though that system wasn't designed to be cyber secure. You know what I mean? Because there are, let's say, rationality checks and redundancies in place that, due to, let's say, naturally occurring events in the vehicle, the system is resilient against that. If that naturally anomalous event is now an adversary purposely doing it, the system will be resilient just as well. So I think it's actually very good that, at General Motors we have systems that are designed with functional safety, and so now when we do our cybersecurity measures, it actually ends up just becoming like another kind of layer of defense for us.
So we've talked about where we've been, where we are. We're going to talk now about where we're going. So put on your predictive analytic hats and analyze for me new technologies or new strategies that might help gear the conversation in a different direction where we are talking about security in a more open dynamic. Is there anything that you see coming down the road, Andre, in the next 5 years that could be a game changer?
So the one area where I really hope that more work will be done is to combine product, Kevin talked about it in the beginning, how GM is organized, but to combine product security, IT security, manufacturing security, functional safety, all of these areas are coming together. There's a lot to learn from each other. There are expertise, resources to share, and currently I think most stakeholders still, they start to combine that, but we are far away from really living that combined approach.
Are you seeing it slowly come closer and closer?
And I think that will have a huge impact in the next 5 years.
How about you?
Yeah, I think for General Motors, I think the types of attacks that we're thinking about has expanded greatly. I think many years ago it was all about the classic hacker in the basement trying to impact our fleet. Let's
Not
say.
hacker.
Yeah.
Not hacker.
Oh, adversary.
Yes.
Yep, an adversary. Now we're thinking about theft and ransomware and relay attacks, and we just really broadened the different ways an adversary could impact our vehicle to things that are maybe they're more motivated by for whatever reason. Maybe there's a financial gain, or it's easier to do, or whatever. So I would say that's been a challenge for us, and like I said, it's broadened our focus, and we were able to concentrate on things that we didn't earlier, because now we have a basic fundamental approach in place, and we can kind of expand and benefit other parts of our business.
Dennis?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I've been thinking about it is that as the automotive technology changes and the vehicle stops looking like a traditional vehicle, the more that the cybersecurity problem becomes more conventional, which means I think that as we become, as we're doing other things in the vehicle, besides driving, the attractiveness of us as a target in that vehicle becomes greater. So not to necessarily disrupt the vehicle, but to get to payment processing or communications or other pattern of life privacy issues. And so I think 5 years out, there's probably a lot of debate about what the road looks like then, but I do expect that the cybersecurity issues will kind of come back into a more normal space, whereas right now they're still on a periphery where only researchers and motivated nation states are active.
So when you bring up motivated nation states and we start talking about bad actors in that capacity, I think that it's a real game changer. From our side of the world, we are a defense contractor, much like Booz Allen Hamilton. We operate both in the DoD side as well as the commercial side, and we start to see the different threat vectors between the two. But the one tie that sort of binds everybody together is Department of Homeland Security, and if there is a nation state that somehow is able to exploit a technology en masse here, how likely, I know you're doing stuff at GM that's defense connected. I'm not really sure. I know you are a defense contractor. I'm not sure what Lear does in that capacity. But are you seeing anything that makes it more of a homeland security consideration, or is it something that is just too abstract?
Like I said earlier, we do talk to a lot of three-letter agencies for various reasons that I'm not at liberty to divulge. But I would say we've talked to a lot of defense contractors, and they come into the auto industry, and I think vendors and suppliers come in and think, oh my God, it's a billions of dollars industry, and they're surprised how much we look at cost, let's say. And we're not necessarily driving to put defense-grade security in our cars. We're not protecting a military satellite, right? So we're doing what we think, like I said before, is effective, practical, and commensurate with the risk and threat, right? So that's been kind of a wake up for the defense contractor. They think they're going to come in and sell us the same thing they sold, the Air Force, and that's good conversations, but they're not necessarily, apples to apples. Right. So,
I think it remains to be seen probably what a real national level response would be, and unfortunately, that will probably occur at some point in our lives. But until it happens, I don't know that we can sort of project confidently who will take the lead and what the interactions will look like. I do think that the NotPetya attacks sort of demonstrated how a sort of geopolitical instability and a kind of less of a concern about attribution and knock-on effects from nation states, allegedly, could result in implications for the industry, that any industry, but particularly automotive, that used to be sort of set aside as well. That'd be a national level problem. That'd be a government problem. And you saw, well, maybe that's true, but the reality for some really big multinational corporations was severe, just because of countries that they happen to operate in and the architecture of their networks. So I do think that the conversation around sort of cyber problems will start to probably look at geopolitical instability a little bit more, and we'll have to sort of come to terms with the fact that there's something between criminal activity and an act of war, a gray space that's being exploited by some countries, and contending with that will be a challenge for government and industry.
I want to give our audience the 9-minute warning. So I'm going to ask our panelists our final question, but if anyone has any questions you'd like to stand up and ask or submit on card, please do so. But while we wait for that, we wanted to talk about your one cyber automotive wish. So if you had the power to have one wish granted, what would it be? Kevin, if Mary Barra came down today, I'm going to grant you any wish you want.
That's a tough question, and I don't want to dodge or punt, but I'm going to liken it to, I said kind of earlier, there's no silver bullet for how to secure anything. I also don't think there's necessarily one wish or one thing I would ask for that would pivot or we're going to be, the industry would be so much better, the next day. I think in many cases with any industry and products, security a lot of times is dependent on, let's say, the kind of the personal security hygiene of the user, in the sense that, if most of your interactions with the vehicle when it comes to connectivity, if they have passwords, if you're using your phone, I mean, it sounds simple, but just keeping strong passwords and not using repeated passwords and changing them often and making sure they're strong. And I know that's not a very expert answer, but honestly, if you do things like that, you're going to be in good shape, I think, regardless of what kind of products you're using. So not really an industry thing, but if you're concerned as a consumer, that would be my recommendation.
So the consumer is something we haven't talked about. I know we were supposed to open the floor, but at what point do we educate the consumer on cybersecurity? Is this something that's connected closely to safety, like an airbag or a seatbelt down the road, where they're looking at it as a safety feature? And is that onus on the industry to educate them?
Well, I just gave my 30-second little tidbit, but I would say in general, I think as folks, if they read events online, you'll kind of just hear those same kind of best practices I just described, and really, it doesn't matter what kind of product you're using, they generally apply. So that, and of course, we have terms and conditions and owner's manual, and there are ways that we try to communicate. Hopefully they're effective.
So you have one or both questions
Sure.
that you could.
Well, I'll take the question on what I think the industry can do, which is there has been a reticence for good reason to talk about cybersecurity in automotive, because I think the risk can get and has gotten overblown in some circumstances. And I think in some ways that has prevented the industry from demonstrating how much progress has been made. So a lot of that progress is behind the scenes. I don't know that customers or regulators have necessarily been exposed to how much good work has gone into security. There's a lot more that needs to happen, but I think figuring out some way to build some trust or take some chances around communicating what's being done in a positive way and not worry as much about it being misinterpreted or raising alarm bells about security would be good for everybody who's working this problem.
That's mine, actually.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I actually had that same one prepared, more or less. So I wish the industry would be enabled to open up more. There's always this secrecy around security, and it is for a good reason, but I wish we could figure out how to open up more, how to openly discuss security, what we do, basically invite the public, look at it, make it better. I think that would push security quite a lot.
And actually, that's one of the reasons why General Motors participates in events like this. It's our way to demonstrate our commitment to security for our customers and be open to questions. And so it may change over time. Maybe there'll be a different approach. I think we'll always continue doing this, and we've been doing conferences and panels for a few years now. So again, this is us trying to build that trust that we recognize the challenge, and we, like I said earlier, have a dedicated global organization addressing it.
So I'll open the floor up if there are any questions from anyone. We got a taker.
Hi, how we doing? Mark Ignash, Program Manager Defense for Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I just wanted to dig a little bit more into the defense topic. We talked a bit about from GM's perspective in terms of integrating defense-grade components into a vehicle, but from the perspective of information sharing, is there anything that can be expanded upon in terms of sharing based on lessons learned? Because as we see, a lot of the components integrated into defense platforms, the vehicles themselves are shared with commercial automotive, commercial trucking. So from the sharing component, can you expand on, are there discussions there? Are there not?
Yeah.
Where do we see that going?
Yeah, we definitely have a couple formal organizations, alliances, collaborations with the defense industry. There's also, like I said earlier, we sell a lot of vehicles to, the OEMs sell a lot of vehicles to the government. You could imagine the government would have concerns potentially around the cybersecurity posture of those vehicles. So we have those kind of conversations. And like I said, we also, Lockheed and others at Boeing that we've spoken with. So yeah, for sure, we've shared best practices and had information exchanges that benefited all parties. It will continue, and with other industries as well. And I'll just leave it at that, and we can talk more maybe offline if you'd like.
Also, I'm not tied to an automaker, so occasionally I'll say other things and not get anyone in trouble. But there are clearances that are granted to individuals as well, or individuals come into companies with clearances. And so there's information sharing that can occur that way. And there are organizations that are set up to provide that. The ISAC is also a forum through which some people can have access to some of that information. And then I do think, and I think Jennifer, you indicated that GRIM works sort of across spaces. There's certainly, again, protecting equities both in industry and on the government side. There is a sharing of security principles. There are people from Booz Allen, for example, who have experience on the sort of front lines of cybersecurity with the government, doing things that the government does, and they're able to bring that expertise into the industry, and that flow happens both formally and informally, and I think it's actually something that's picked up over the last couple of years.
Hi, I'm Tim Seppel. I'm a local reporter. I want to ask one question to each of the four panelists. When was the last time you read the end user license agreement and the owner's manual for your car? And do you feel that that's an acceptable way to inform your customer about cybersecurity threats for their vehicle?
I'll answer that one if you want on behalf of the panel, although I appreciate your efforts at facilitation. So I think that there's a known challenge around end users agreements that applies to all consumer electronics. And there's a balance of, sorry.
I told you.
One question though. When was the last time you read an end user license agreement or your vehicle manual before clicking I accept or putting your key in the ignition or pressing the start button and driving away off the lot?
I might not be the best person to ask because
that's why I asked everybody.
No, I was saying that facetiously because I'm probably the best person to ask because I actually like to read that stuff. And I'm interested in the industry. And I have a recent purchase where I've unfortunately had to go into the owner's manual a few times. So But my answer to your question was, I think there's a challenge around, and we see this in cybersecurity broadly, which are the sort of legal requirements and the communications that have to happen and are required to happen, and then figuring out a way to do that that's also consumable for the product. And so that's an issue, as I was saying, that's true for any consumer electronics, it's true for automotive. And I think there's something to figure out there, and the answer to that question I think is a good one to be posing. It's not an easy one to answer given the requirements that are in place legally.
So I'll add to that, if you don't mind. Technically, I'm not a panelist, but in my company, we do have to read through all of that material because it's a part of the way we do business. If we are hired to do exploitation of a product, be it a car or drone or whatever it might be, we need to know our legal bounds, and we have to go through the manuals to learn how it works and how it functions. So for us, again, we're probably not the best litmus test, but I understand the point that you're trying to make. And it is something that on the cyber research side, I'm very passionate about, and we probably all share the same passion, is a recognition of we have to do better and more to educate the consumer, right? And so grassroots efforts through community outreach, this is something that my company does, getting out there and speaking to special interest groups that need to understand more about. We do that self-servingly, because I don't want you to think of hackers as being the criminal-minded folks that are trying to do evil deeds to you as a consumer. We want to re-educate you and teach you about the value of the work that we do. And so part of that is understanding vulnerabilities and what to look for in user agreements and how to read the fine print to understand what personal information you might be giving away. That's a grassroots effort. So I think as an industry, an industry-wide statement, we do recognize that we do have to have more education out there for consumers, and what form does it take and what's the best way to deliver it? Is it through dealerships? Is it part of a lease agreement? Is it community education? I think that's still a question mark at the time, and I think that's fair to say that. But we are trying to figure that out very rapidly. Is that good? Anyone else? We got 1.5 minutes. Nobody gets to drink anything at the reception.
We're actually over. That's over.
Oh, that's over. We're over. All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, wait. Will we have one more? Okay.
So there's a lot of talk about talent and the skills gap. Are you seeing that in your companies, that cybersecurity skills gap? And is there something that your specific company is doing to address it?
I can take that one too, if you're okay with it. So we definitely recognize that there is workforce development that needs to occur in terms of upskilling existing workforce for cybersecurity. And I think we also recognize the fact I have a hiring need of 20 plus in the state of Michigan for our cyber automotive research specialists. And so there's not an existing degree program to date that brings me the perfect candidate at the perfect time. So we have to do our own training. Part of that effort is we've developed an automotive security training which gives everybody 5 days of lecture coupled with 5 days of hands-on lab work so that they can understand the vulnerabilities of a vehicle network. But this is for existing workforce. So we are definitely seeing that I'm not going to be able to hire 20 plus in Michigan without cultivating and growing my own talent, and by proxy reaching out with our expertise to educate existing auto workers and engineers, either electrical, mechanical, or systems engineers that maybe need to understand a bit more about the fundamentals of cybersecurity. So we are trying from our little corner of the world to address that issue, and I'm certain that everybody has, to some degree or another, reached out on the talent side looking for that magical unicorn that can fill that empty chair. Anyone else want to? You're good? You're all good? Okay, well, I think that's it. So thank you very much. Thank you for sticking around for us, and enjoy the rest of the show.